Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, if you were watching the political conventions, don't expect to hear too much from Louisiana. Nevertheless, our delegations are there. We'll look at who they are and what to expect as attention shifts from the Republicans to the Democrats. Back home, qualifying has been open for the fall elections and the ballots are full. We'll be looking at those stories tonight, plus we'll examine the impact that professional sports has had on molding local social policy. Our Future Watch segment tracks future streetcar service, and we'll take a special look at the politics and controversies in Baton Rouge after 2 tumultuous weeks. Caucusing for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, lawpolitics.com. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And it's to Stephanie first. And qualifying is wrapped up for the fall elections. And who isn't running for the U.S. Senate?
I'm not.
Nobody here is running.
Yes. A lot of people, I mean, biggest field we've ever had, more than 24 it looks like, or at least 24. The surprise today, of course, was David Duke, who showed up. There was some talk, he had put out word that he was possibly going to run for the first district congressional seat against Steve Scalise, which would have been interesting because, of course, Steve Scalise had that controversy with David Duke a couple of years ago, and he's so high-ranking in Congress, so he, probably would have won. I mean, almost definitely would have won. However, it would have been, the type of story that gets a lot of attention and negative attention for Louisiana, of course. It did rocket around the internet today that David Duke qualified. It's interesting. He really is kind of tying his, wagon to Donald Trump, saying, even in his announcement video, saying, America first. You know who said that first? I did. I love Donald Trump's speech. I think what he's exposing, the people he's talking to are really my potential voters. It was interesting, the Senate, the Republican establishment, he qualifies as a Republican. The Republican establishment just came down very hard on him immediately. The National Republican Senate Campaign Committee, the state Republican Party, other candidates, Democrat and Republican, Charles Boustany, John Kennedy, all said he has no place and his policies have no place in this race.
And Duke basically said, good, I'm glad they're not.
Well, exactly. And he also kind of looked at Donald Trump again and said, yeah, they tried to do that with Donald Trump and look what happened. So it's
any statement from the Trump campaign, since he's tying himself so closely?
They reiterated that they reject his endorsement. If you kind of think back of when it first happened, the Trump campaign took a few days to arrive at that position, and which was uncomfortable for them, and they, that's basically it at this point.
And he, I came directly from qualifying at the Secretary of State's office, and Duke showed up with some showing of organization. He had a photographer there. There was someone with a video camera that was there as well.
And the videos posted. Yes.
Right. But I tell you, the news of him showing up this morning just like shot through the Secretary of State's office like a virus. And no two words get Louisiana political reporters typing faster than David Duke. And when you heard the keyboards just light up.
And so far, that's all we've been talking about is David Duke. Who else is
And we have to say, in addition to the Donald Trump campaign, he's citing the incidents in Baton Rouge that we're going to talk about and the reaction to that.
Right.
In addition to that, it's again, a huge field, but it's the people we expected. It's John Kennedy, the treasurer, and the Congressman Boustany and Fleming, Gow, former congressman, a couple of Democrats, Foster Campbell, Caroline Fayard. It's
Joshua Pellerin, Bay Patel in New Orleans,
Is there an
Troy
early favorite?
The polls really the early polls have John Kennedy way ahead, and I think that's a function of the fact that he's a statewide official and very well known.
His money makes him competitive too.
Sure, and he's a very good campaigner. The congressmen are from smaller areas; they're not from the big cities. It's just going to be tough to get attention, I think, when we have so much else going on. We have Trump, and then we also, what are they going to do with the debates when you have all these candidates? I mean, that's going to be interesting to see.
24 candidites, you got to wonder if David Duke wasn't sitting there thinking, wow, 10%, 15%,
Exactly.
I'm in a runoff.
And if you remember, 20 years ago, he was in the Senate race. He got 12% that year, but there were two main Democrats in, Mary Landrieu and Richard Ayub, and the Republicans were so worried that we could either have two Democrats in a runoff or a Democrat and Duke, that they all kind of piled in behind Woody Jenkins, remember?
So
And
how
that's
about-
how we got Mary Landry.
So how about this scenario? Louisiana
Yeah.
Senate race goes into a runoff, which it will.
In December.
And the partisan makeup of the Senate is maybe hangs in the balance, or it's really tight, and David Duke's in the runoff for a national race.
Versus a Democrat.
Versus a Democrat.
What do the Republicans do? Yes.
Okay, well, that's something that we'll certainly see if that does
We
happen.
don't
But
take
I wanted to-
Thanksgiving off. That's what we do.
Jeremy, you wrote something about PACs and then also about, war chests. I mean, who does have the most money right now and who's, raising it?
Well, cash on hand is Charles Bustani with John Fleming just right behind him. But Treasurer Kennedy is really not too far behind them either. But the super PACs are starting to come into play. And what's really interesting is there are a lot of these home-brewed super PACs that are created in Louisiana that really aren't doing too great. And it's opening up a hole for these national groups that have super PACs to come in. There's already one that's been set up for John Kennedy, and sources close to his campaign tell me that he has transferred $2 million from his state account to that national super PAC. It's called ESA Fund. The guy who's going to be running those operations in Louisiana is Kyle Ruckert. He is the former campaign manager and chief of staff to David Vitter. So they're going to be working together. Club for Growth is a super PAC that started attacking Bustani in Louisiana. They've endorsed Fleming. There's a super PAC now for Rob Maness. The Riley Company, the folks behind the Riley Company here in New Orleans are bankrolling that super PAC. They've even sponsored a poll for Rob Maness. So it looks like, once again, the super PAC's going to play an important role in a Louisiana election this year. But it looks like it's going to be those PACs that have national backers will probably make a bigger splash.
Right, and it's interesting, a lot of the national money people are talking about with Duke at the top of the Republican ticket, a lot of the Republican money is going to go to Senate races.
So with Kennedy, that occurs to me is that as state treasurer, he's had the good bully pulpit to talk about the traditional Republican issues, the fiscal conservative type of issues. So he can talk Republican talk as opposed to the Trump talk.
It's interesting. What I think what you're starting to hear they're going to try to throw at him is, we had this fiscal crisis. You were in office all the time. Where were you? And of course he'll say he wasn't in charge of it. But they try to link him maybe to Bobby Jindal.
He definitely he's doing things that sound like Trump. I mean, John Kennedy, I would have never guessed that he would have cursed in a public forum, but he did. He has, a couple of times. Trump, of course, got in trouble for that last year. He's kind of got the same diction as Trump on certain issues. He's hitting the same anti-establishment themes, and then you got, John Fleming is actually saying in public that he's a lot like Trump. Troy Hebert has billboards for him. Rob Maness is saying, I'm like Mr. Trump. So there's a lot of Trump talk in the Senate race.
Stephanie, let me get you to touch on pretty quickly some of the other races, qualifying for some of the other local ones.
We have two open house seats, the two members who are running for Senate. Again, big fields, a dozen candidates in the 3rd District. Scott Angel is probably the leading candidate, who of course ran for governor, the public service commissioner. That's in the Acadiana area, another crowded one up in the Shreveport area. Some judgeships in New Orleans. One kind of an interesting place to watch is the school board in New Orleans, because not so many candidates have qualified, but it's, this is the new school board is going to oversee reunification of the schools, which is a very big deal, a lot of money, a lot of politics. The kind of charter school people are backing some candidates.
So this fall, obviously, the presidential race or U.S. Senate race, but we have some other local races too.
We do.
Like in Plaquemines Parish to succeed, Amos Cormier, his son actually, among others, has qualified. So, okay.
And also, I think that, it's not in our area, but the Baton Rouge mayor's race is going to be very interesting.
And that's just where I'm going right now with Jeremy. The Baton Rouge has really seen its share of woes over the past 2.5 weeks or so. It's been such a tumultuous time for the city. How is that impacting the political scene there? And then what is the feeling in Baton Rouge with this terrible incident, that happened this past Sunday, the loss of 3 officers, 3 others injured, and you saw the funeral procession for one of the officers today, you were saying? Yeah,
and I left the Secretary of State's office and went back to the Capitol before I headed here, and got on the interstate at the Capitol. It took me a half hour to make it to the parish line, and the scene was really amazing. There was a line of police cars stretching those 10, 12 miles, police cars from different states, from different cities, and people had pulled over on the side of the roads and were standing on top of their vehicles looking over the concrete barricade or standing on the side of the roads waving. at each of the crossovers of the interstate, they had fire trucks with flags, and it was really something to see, and it's something that I've never seen in that city, and it was certainly an outpouring of emotions.
And there are 2 more services that are going to be held soon. But you know, into the politics also, the mayor there has really been under fire.
Right, and look, you know, this was a tragedy that I think touches upon every thread in the fabric of our lives, and look, that includes politics, and I think it's going to play out a lot in the 2nd congressional district race. You know, we saw Cedric Richmond, the incumbent, qualify this week, and basically he questioned the Mayor Kip Holden's response to this. He publicly asked him to resign. Meanwhile, the mayor came back and accused the congressman of keeping Baton Rouge in the lost and found box during his term. And look, I think Kip Holden's response is going to be center stage throughout this entire election in the 2nd district. Meanwhile, there's a mayor's race in Baton Rouge as well to replace Kip Holden. And that's going to be less about how the candidates responded and more about where Baton Rouge goes from here. I think there's going to be some very frank conversations about race on the campaign trail, and as well as the geography of the city, and that's going to make for some tense moments on the campaign trail. And I think it's going to be a conversation that the city is ready to have. From a legislative standpoint, I think 2017 is going to host a variety of issues related to this topic. Already this year, the so-called Blue Lives Matter law was passed, where it created a hate crime for the targeting of police officers and first responders. It hasn't taken effect yet, but it certainly probably would have applied to Baton Rouge. Meanwhile, in D.C. on the Hill, we're seeing efforts like a bipartisan effort from Congressman Richmond and Garrett Graves out of Baton Rouge to put law enforcement in touch with more resources to handle situations like these.
Well, Baton Rouge, our sister city just up the river, and everybody here in the New Orleans region, I know our hearts ache for the city and also for the families who have suffered this terrible loss, for the Baton Rouge Police Department, the Sheriff's Department. As we said, 2 more services yet to go.
That's right.
Right.
In Kip Holden's case, wasn't he divided? Didn't he have strong support from the police union? And so
he's always had a strong political relationship with all of the unions. He did have support, but I think it's the community that really got up in arms about this, and you had some well-known community activists threatening to recall, and he was in D.C. and you know, he missed some key moments, I think, in the aftermath.
And it's interesting. I think John Bell Edwards, the governor, almost stepped into the role that a mayor would normally play as kind of consoler and convener in chief, and he has been all over this.
So the
obviously.
criticism for Holden, in case anybody's wondering, it's not what he said; it's what he didn't say.
And
where he wasn't.
He just.
Right.
And this was after the Alton Sterling shooting.
Right.
Really, that was the criticism, when he just wasn't present. Okay, thanks a lot, both of you guys. I'm going to throw it on over to Errol right now, and it looks like New Orleans is in the running for NBA All-Star game because Charlotte lost it.
The city of Charlotte must be getting to hate New Orleans, okay? Especially in terms of basketball, because if you remember, the team that we have was the original Charlotte Hornets. That they lost that franchise because they refused to build a new arena. And one reason they refused to build a new arena, it's kind of an untold story, was that there was an election to raise the minimum wage, and that was defeated, and so there was some retaliation that was going on. But anyway, and so the Hornets wound up moving here, where we had a new arena that was waiting to be built, and now it's changed to the Pelicans, and they gave the Hornets name back. But this is twice, I think, that they felt this. You know, this is a really touchy situation. We've seen many examples of professional sports, especially at the major league level, being a social force. And one thing that came to my mind really quickly is, you know, the South did not have big league teams, and the issue with Charlotte, it has to do with gays, LGBT, and the use of bathrooms.
In their legislation.
In that, okay. And so that's one issue, but there were times when race was an issue too. And that was certainly the case in the South, that there were not big league professional sports in the South until the Civil Rights Bill was passed. And once the Civil Rights Bill passed, and once hotels could be integrated, but even at that, the Civil Rights Bill didn't guarantee all that. And there was an incident in New Orleans in 1965 where the city was hosting the All-American Football League All-Star Game. And it was a big thing because New Orleans was actively courting the NFL. And so this was a big thing to show that they could do it. And the players came to town, and the black ball players boycotted because they weren't allowed into restaurants and hotels, and the white ball players joined them. And so all of a sudden, here we are trying to get an NFL team, and the players won't play. And the biggest insult, this game was moved to Houston. And so I think they got a message across. And really quickly, city leaders, went to the hotels, went to the restaurants, said, we got to stop this, all right? And that was the beginning of the public accommodations bill. But we saw that all over the South, and that it really was a changer. Atlanta was one of the first markets to start getting teams. And in recent times, we saw it last year with the college championship games in Indiana. There was questions about the laws in Indiana.
Mike Pence, the new vice presidential nominee, was very involved in that. Yes.
And then we saw it also last year with the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, who'd made some comments that were interpreted as being racist comments. And so big thing, sports is such a force that it can really have an impact on the way that cities respond. In the case of going back to Charlotte losing their basketball team, now they have a brand new Coliseum. And so once they lost it,
well,
they
they're
get
not
the
losing
message.
their team; they're losing the
They're losing the
All-Star
All-Star game.
Right, yeah. No, but I'm talking about the original thing
Right.
when they lost their team. But in this case, yes, the All-Star game. New Orleans this will be the third All-Star game New Orleans has had. For being in the NBA a relatively short period of time.
Right.
But what they
The
like
last
about
was in
New
the
Orleans,
2014, but we don't have it for sure. Not yet.
No,
but
no,
we're high
no.
on the list right now.
it would be like the first weekend of the Mardi Gras season. They have to work it out.
Right.
But New Orleans, it's quick to move into. It's a compact city. They have the place, they have the hotel, they have the hotel rooms. And
We
so
sort of have a template
it's a
for it.
favorite place,
We can
right?
move into it really quick
Right.
because we've done it before. Okay, Errol, thanks a lot. I'm going to go over to Dawn right now. Streetcars, where are they going to go?
Well, the streetcars that are going to go from Canal Street to Elysian Fields, the new North Rampart extension, should be open and running for customer service in September. Next month, August, which is now only days away, in early August you should see test runs of streetcars along that line. They're currently paving North Rampart Street to get the roadway back open for vehicle. It's been open sort of one way each direction in kind of a bumpy, messy way throughout construction, but it's going to be reopening in August. So that is almost done. There is currently, they just wrapped up over 10 community meetings. There are 4 service proposals on the RTA website. That's norta.com to determine which bus routes stay, how the bus routes stay. I don't know if you recall, but when the Loyola streetcar line opened, the 2 of the bus lines terminated at Union Passenger Terminal. Coming from the uptown area, they terminated, and people had to switch to either another bus or onto the Loyola streetcar line. And that was a major problem for people who were coming from on the Martin Luther King route all the way from uptown and wanting to head past Canal Street or past Loyola Avenue. Those bus lines are going to be resuming as well, but they want to make sure with this Rampart Street setup that customers have a chance to voice their opinion. You have until Monday to call or email your comments, which will go directly to the Board of Commissioners that will be voting on the final service plans in August. So norta.com. Take a look at those 4 plans. If ridership along that route from the 9th Ward in through Elysian Fields area is important to you. The next potential expansion they're looking at would be beyond Elysian Fields and all the way down to Press Street. The RTA is up for a grant on that right now. It's a very competitive grant, and cities that are expanding their light rail service all over the country are looking for that money. It's called a Tiger Grant. They don't know yet if they get some of that grant, whether the whole project would be funded, where the remaining funding would come. It would depend on how much, if the grant's received, and how much of the grant is received. But they should know by October if they're successful in getting that funding. Another big change for the RTA is they say they went through post-Katrina recovery, rebuilding. Now they're working on revitalization. A lot of that is technology. There's a new app that you can get on your phone for service and for routes. It's one of the best deals in town if you have tourists coming, or even one day is a 3-day pass that gets you on buses and streetcars as many rides as you want. So
And how much is that?
$3.
$3.
To hop on, hop off all day long. You know, we talk often about the streetcar as this historical treasure that's more like a tourist attraction. Across the RTA, ridership is actually 90% local people. It's used by service industry people, people going to and from work, people going to and from school or entertainment. 80% of the streetcars alone are local ridership. So it's really about serving the local people. And the RTA says, you know, they give themselves a pat on the back, but they say their service, their expanding services have really increased businesses along those routes. When the Loyola streetcar line came in, it was tied in with $2 billion in private investment along Loyola Avenue. The same thing is now happening along North Rampart Street. And they're doing things, they say that the money going into the new airport terminal has caused them to add new bus routes going right from Union Passenger Terminal out to the airport to give the people who are working at the airport access to service too. So it's growing.
It's growing.
And it's back to a 24/7 system.
It really changes your neighborhood for the better. I mean, it's such an urban amenity. It looks good. It feels good. And people are really attracted to the neighborhoods by them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Dawn. I'm going to go over to Stephanie now. We just finished one convention, gone on over to the other. And Louisiana was there.
Louisiana
last
was
one.
there.
It will be there.
Yes.
Okay. And
exactly.
who was there?
Okay. Republican convention that we just finished up. It's interesting. The first we started with Louisiana and kind of ended with Louisiana. Not the highest profile people, but no big politicians, but Duck Dynasty, of course. Willie Robertson was the very first speaker on Monday, and, you know, endorsed his fellow reality star. He had already endorsed him, but he talked about his fellow reality star, Donald Trump. And at the end, we had Tony Perkins, which is interesting, a former Louisiana politician, state representative, but really known. He's in Washington now. He's a Louisiana delegate, but he's the head of the Family Research Council, which is really the leading kind of religious right activist group. And he's someone who had actually been a very big supporter of Ted Cruz. There was a big group of Cruz supporters in the Louisiana delegation, and, you know, Cruz ended up not endorsing Trump very publicly. Yeah. He did give a shout out, I will say, to Ted Cruz, to Alton Sterling's family for how they've handled things. I thought that was very interesting and kind of overshadowed. But at the end, Tony Perkins did say, look, we have a process. This is the process. This is our nominee. I'm supporting him. But he really does differ from Trump on a lot of issues. They're very interested in kind of the religious freedom, same-sex, you know, fighting same-sex marriage, even though it's the law of the land. Trump really used his speech to reach out to lesbian and gay people. When he really kind of bashes a lot of other people, he's, you know, taking a different tone. So I think it's just one more basic, you know, Republican group that just is with this nominee that really they kind of was not their first, second, third, fourth choice.
But he is their nominee.
But he is their nominee.
Democrats, real quick, what do we look forward to?
A big group. We have super delegates on the Democratic side, so that includes Governor John Bel Edwards. It's unclear right now whether he's going. He was planning to go, but he's been going to the police funeral, so we don't know that. Cedric Richmond is a super delegate. Mayor Mitch Landrieu is a delegate. Mary Landrieu is a delegate. No speakers from Louisiana as of now. They could be announced later, but a really enthusiastic group for Clinton, I think, where the Republican group, there were a lot of Cruz supporters. There were also a lot of Trump supporters, but, you know, kind of a divided delegation. Some delegations will be divided because, of course, Bernie Sanders won a lot of states, but that's not the South. Louisiana is really firmly for Clinton, and we are definitely going to see Mitch Landrieu and Cedric Richmond out there in the country campaigning for her. They are very, very eager to do so, they tell me.
Okay, so when does the convention start?
Monday, yes.
In Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, Hillary Clinton accepts the nomination Thursday.
Okay,
so
very good. Thanks.
Get out and walk around this weekend, because then you're going to be back on your couches next week.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Over to Jeremy. You know, we have, for most of this year, heard about the dire situation of Louisiana's budget. Kind of quiet right now, but what's it looking like?
Oh, it's still troubling. It
It's still bad.
And it has not been solved in the past 3.5 weeks. You know, right now the latest thing that happened is that the state is moving forward with setting the foundation for possibly getting a short-term loan to help with cash flow issues in this fiscal year. But I think as we next few weeks, next couple months, I think you're going to probably see Republicans wanting to take a closer look at the tax collections and net receipts and see where we're at. You know, the prediction was that tax collections would go up heading into the fall before they officially close the books on the fiscal year. There's still some skepticism about whether or not that's going to happen.
And isn't there a task force that's going to start meeting in September to take a look at tax policy and restructuring of tax structure, tax code?
And it's this tax reform task force started meeting, I guess, towards the end of the spring. They met today. They meet every Friday. And the goal of this task force is to present a report in September with a set of recommendations to be voted on in the 2017 regular session for budget reforms, tax reform issues.
And so what is business stance, business and corporations, because there's been so much talk about the exemptions, the credits, what are they saying?
Right, so there's a really interesting speech this week from the Louisiana Chemical Association director, Dan Bornay. He's also the voice of Tiger Stadium. So, you know, his prediction is that business will have to pay an additional, I think it was $3 billion in taxes over the next 2 years due to changes that the legislature made. All of them are temporary in nature, so he's kind of wondering when and how will the legislature turn around and kind of go after business and industry again. He's telling his supporters that the best way to avoid a repeat in their eyes is to be more involved with this task force that's going to have its report come out in September.
Okay, well, we'll be looking for that. Time right now to look ahead. Errol.
As work goes on the northern terminal at the airport, the aviation board is starting to take applications for people that either want to be food vendors or want to sell products there. And part of the specifications is that you have to be open 2 hours before the first flight and until the last flight, which is roughly 4:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock. And then also your sales are set to whatever your street price is plus 10%. You can go up higher than that. But anyway, the bidding process has begun.
Okay. Jeremy.
There's a competitive Public Service Commission race in Northeast Louisiana that has drawn in a number of contenders that should be interesting to watch.
Okay. Dawn?
Next big thing for the RTA is a 20-year look-ahead strategic plan that will kick off in 2017, and they are looking to hear from as much ridership, as much as the normal public as possible, to figure out what needs there are in the next 20 years as they look for financing.
Thanks, Steph.
Okay. New Orleans voters rejected a combined millage for police and fire last spring. Mayor Mitch Landrieu is coming back and saying, what if you just give me money for fire to settle the pension lawsuit? So he is asking the council to put that on the ballot. Okay. It could be December 10th, which is the date of the Senate runoff.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.